Welcome to UK100's launch of our local pathway to COP26. I'm Polly Billington, I'm the director of UK100, and this webinar here this morning is to launch the pledge that we have managed to secure 41 signatories to this morning to be able to get to net zero faster than government's targets. We have on the call today local leaders, cabinet members, senior council officers, MPs, civil servants from government departments, key business and industry partners, academics, and indeed international authorities and local authority networks from across the globe. So all of those people are here because they know how important it is that local leadership helps to deliver on climate action. Now, I know we've all got very used to Zoom calls over the last few months, but it's always worthwhile having a little bit of a reminder about what that housekeeping might need to be. We're using the chat function for chat. So if you've got contributions to the conversation, please put them in there, and certainly share links to useful information that you have that other people might find informative in terms of this, in terms of the subject matter today. Use the Q&A function to submit questions for the panel speakers. And if you've got a specific question for a specific person, do say that. We're going to have 2 Q&A sessions, so please submit your questions at the right time. That always makes things easier for everybody. This session is going to be recorded, so if you can't stay for the whole thing, don't worry, it'll be available to rewatch on our website at a later time. And if you have colleagues that wanted to join, do alert them to that too. We've got a hashtag, COP26 local. We want to be able to continue this conversation online and engaging more with our speakers and the wider network that we've managed to create. So, who is speaking today? First of all, we have a range of speakers who are going to be talking about what we need to do and why political leadership is so important, starting off with our keynote speaker, Nigel Topping. And then we will have a section which is about the how we do that. That is going to be led by Andy Kerr from Climate Kick, who will be talking about the Collaborating for Net Zero project and how technical assistance can be available for local authorities who really want to engage in the whole systems transformation that is required here. But the pledge is the key thing that we've been talking about today. We decided that we needed to be able to update and make our pledge of our members more ambitious, because so many things have changed since our members made their pledge initially back around the time of Paris in 2015, which was about shifting to 100% clean energy by 2050. Now, I think it's a signal of how things have changed, that which seemed extraordinarily ambitious back in 2015 is now something that is comparatively easy to do. And that is by no means least of all to do with the fact that we have had that local leadership making that a reality. So some of the key things that we've said is that we're going to do everything within our power and influence to rapidly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And we'll work with our residents and businesses to bring our wider communities' emissions in line with net zero as soon as possible. And we'll continue to lead the UK's response to net zero, going ahead of the government goal and taking the first steps with urgency. That amount of ambition is really important in the context in which we're talking. And especially because this isn't just about what's happening in the UK, this also links in with the global Race to Zero campaign that we will be hearing more about from our keynote speaker, Nigel Topping, in a moment. The reason why it's so important that we align with the Race to Zero is that this is a global challenge that needs to be delivered locally. So now the people who have signed up to this Net Zero Local Leadership Pledge are part of a global movement, not only of cities, but businesses, investors and academic institutions who all know that net zero carbon emissions need to happen as soon as possible. And the knowledge sharing, which is so much part of the UK100 network's purpose, is not only about sharing with leaders within the UK, but from across the world as well. And almost all of the leaders that have signed up to our Net Zero Pledge have also signed up to the Race to Zero. This is the way to becoming part of that global network. And that global network is represented by the cities and regions in the UNFCCC process. You can see us there located amongst a whole alphabet soup of logos of other networks across the globe who are working on this. And the local government and municipal associations COP26 roadmap we are part of that, because that joint roadmap is important to being able to achieve what we need to achieve in Glasgow next year. We're focusing on the priorities of raising ambition, amplifying global climate action, and climate justice and social equity. Next July, we will be hosting a summit and conference where we will be bringing our leaders together, hopefully with local leaders from across the world, again, to show and demonstrate the importance to national government of what is needed and how we need to change. So this is the list of all of the local leaders, including those that snuck under the wire last minute last night. So we shifted from 38 to 41 local leaders, representing every tier of local government across the UK, which I think is a real testament to the commitment of local leaders on climate action, especially if you consider the kind of pressures local leadership has been under with the COVID pandemic over the last few months. And those 41 local authorities represent more than 20 million people. That's almost a third of the UK population. So we think that those 41 are absolutely the trailblazers, but we know that many others can join them. So Jen, if you show the next slide, you can see we would like many others who might be joining today who haven't yet joined this pledge to contact us to consider whether they could also join our net zero local leadership pledge. Now, this is our first panel. We have Nigel Topping, the high-level climate action champion of COP26. We have Marvin Reece, the mayor of Bristol City Council. We have Shirley Rodriguez, the deputy mayor for energy environment for the Greater London Authority. And we have Councillor Ian Courts, who is a portfolio holder for the environment at the West Midlands Combined Authority, with Jackie Homan, who is the head of environment for the West Midlands Combined Authority. And last but not least, Carl Ennis, who is the chief executive of Great Britain and Ireland from Siemens. Siemens are our partners of our work with local leaders, because they understand as an industrial player how important delivering locally is on achieving climate action. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him. But first of all, I'll hand over to Nigel to give us a little bit more about the Race to Zero global campaign and why your local authority should join. Nigel.
Well, first of all, Polly, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to you, UK100. I know you've worked closely with C40 and CDP and WWF on the pledge, and it's really exciting. You know, my role is to work with everyone who's not a national government to drive ambition and action. So this is the funnest part of my work, when I just turn up and you're doing all the hard work of driving more ambition and action. And I love the fact that your slide's already out of date. You know, the one that says join 30 plus leaders, it's now 40 plus leaders. So, and you know, I'm hoping there's maybe 4 or 5 local authorities on the call who can commit during the call, so we can get to 45 by the end of the call. It's really great to have UK local authorities join this new pledge. I mean, you know, local authorities influence, I think it's up to 70% of UK emissions. So, and of course, are responsible for so much of what's going to have to happen in order for us to get to net zero. You know, Gonzalo Munoz is the Chilean high-level champion who I work with, and I talk a lot about what we call the ambition loop. That yes, we need national governments to raise their ambition, but we also need non-state actors, which is the UN language for the people that I'm mandated to work with. So local authorities, cities, regions, businesses, investors. And I think what you're doing is a wonderful example of the ambition loop in action. I love the fact that you've consciously chosen to make the pledge about going faster than national government, which I think is appropriate, right? Because if you're just going at the same speed as national government, you're kind of committing to complying. So it's great to have that that nudge from you. You know, the Gonzalo and I launched the Race to Zero only in June to try and put a wrapper around all the different initiatives, and we've been that are driving to zero by the 2040s. 2050 at the very latest, and it's really encouraging to see more and more of you committing to earlier dates, because it's a positive feedback loop. You know, when local authorities commit, and businesses commit, it affects the way national governments think. We know that the Japanese commitment to net zero by 2050 recently has been very strongly influenced by over 160 local authorities committing to net zero 2050 in Japan, and many Japanese companies committing to net zero 2050. You might have heard recently Sony even threatening to move away from Japan if the government didn't ratchet up its ambition on renewable energy. So just never forget the power of your individual and collective commitment. I also think it's really important, as Dr. Maria Naira from the World Health Organization told us when we launched the Race to Zero, this is not just a race to zero emissions, this has to be a race to zero premature deaths. 7 million people die every year prematurely as a result of pulmonary conditions, which are basically caused by the same things that are causing climate change, coal and cars. So it's great to see so many UK authorities leading on cleaning up the air, which is as well as cleaning up the climate, and that some of the moves on at the national level on combustion engine phase out have also been very much influenced, it's clear, by cities taking a leading role, again ahead of the government. So that ambition loop going. I also really pleased, Polly, to see you putting equity at the heart of your work, because we all know that there's huge asymmetries in cause and effects of climate change locally and internationally, and as we seek to, I don't want to say build back, but build forward our economies post COVID, like building cleaner, healthier, more equitable economies is going to be really important. And already since we launched the Race to Zero, the numbers are growing really fast. There's now over 2,000 businesses, investors, cities, regions, and universities joining. We'll soon have hundreds of schools joining. There's a great initiative called Let's Go to Zero that's been launched by Ashton Trust and WWF in the UK. I'd encourage all of you as local authorities to look at maybe working with them to encourage your schools to join that. Again, schools are a great laboratory for driving change and as well as for learning. And I don't know if it's public yet, but today we have a new initiative of asset managers. I think there's about 30 of them with $9 trillion of assets under management committing to net zero. That's on top of asset owners, which is a lot of pension funds have already committed. So another thing, I think it would be great to get all the local government pooled pension funds to join the Race to Zero as well. So those of you who've got influence in those pooled funds, let's see if we can do that as well. Globally, commitments under the Race to Zero now cover over half of global GDP. I think I saw from your figures, Polly, that the commitments already are covering 21 million, over a third of the population. So you can see these they really do add up, and this overall sense of momentum will be a crucial factor in the success of the COP in Glasgow next year. It's not a formal part of the negotiations, but every time one of you makes this pledge and ratchets up ambition, you're contributing to an overall context of more ambition, of momentum, of movement. And you're making it easier for the businesses that are based in your communities or that are working with you to step up as well. So I just want to really thank all of you for your leadership. Let's get that 40 to well over 100 by the time we get to Glasgow. Let's get the pension funds in. Let's get the businesses that are in your communities in. Let's get everybody to join the Race to Zero, because as we say, this is one of those races that we actually will only win if we're all in it together. So Polly, thank you so much for your leadership and for everybody on the call. And let's get everybody in, and anything I can do to help you on the Race to Zero as we ramp up ambition on the road to Glasgow, just ask. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nigel. That is really inspiring, and it's great to know that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves on this, because I think particularly local government can feel a little bit lonely. You don't often leave your own jurisdiction. You end up having to get lots of responsibility for some of the really mundane bits of life, and to be part of something really big like this. And remember, emptying the bins is part of your climate action. This is where the reality hits the road, and that's why our local leaders are so important. So on that note, I'll move over to Marvin Reece, Mayor of Bristol City Council. And Marvin is going to talk about why Bristol is one of the first to sign up to the UK100 net zero pledge and join that Race to Zero campaign. Marvin.
Thanks very much, Polly, for having me on. And, I really welcome so much of what we've just heard. This has really been an inheritance issue for the city, really, as part of the city's culture to be concerned about its place in the world and the role it plays in the world. And the environmental voice has been a very strong one in Bristol for some time. I think what we have done over recent years, though, is offer a challenge to that voice as well. The challenge around how we meet our global responsibility on climate change and minimize the contribution, eliminate the contribution we make to making the planet uninhabitable for human beings, is tied in with a whole other crisis that we have to face, that we point out: a housing crisis, a city that's rapidly growing, one of the worst cities in the UK for inequality, a growing demand on our services in the face of restricted local government finance that pushes us as a local authority towards spending money on crises and takes away from the capacity we have to think longer term as well about these more strategic, well, immediate, but also strategic challenges. So these are very real challenges that we face now as we come on. We recognise the scale of the challenge that we face within our city boundaries, but we recognise the role we have on the world stage. You know, our ambition, we've been quite clear in setting out. We're doing the work on getting our air quality to compliance and better within the shortest possible time. We set an aim of becoming carbon neutral by 2030, which is phenomenally challenging. But we've also, which I think is really important, brought the Sustainable Development Goals to the centre of our city plan. We've written a one city plan that takes us up to 2050. And we've made the subtle but significant move of not just measuring ourselves against the Sustainable Development Goals, but actually working out how do we proactively deliver the SDGs. And one of the reasons we well, certainly I really like the SDGs is they don't allow any issues to become single issues. We recognise the interplay between all of the things that we have to do. And we talked about a just transition. That is a global phrase. That is hugely important. If we are not to get a political backlash, we have to work with the challenges people face today. I've said to some of the activists that have come across my path, turning up to someone and saying, I know you don't know how you're going to feed your child tomorrow, but I got an existential threat that's more important than that, is not respectful and no way to build an inclusive movement. We have to deal with poverty. We have to deal with inclusion, have to deal with racism and all the other drivers of exclusion that undermine our ability to build a movement and secure and maintain the democratic mandate to bring about the kind of change we need at the scale and pace we need to deliver it if we are going to operate inside inside the limits that are upon us. Can I also just share the need to talk about money? I would love us to decarbonize our systems, our waste system, energy system, transport system, water system. But to do that takes money. We don't have that money in our disposal at local government level. We are on that end of that bid and fail, bid and succeed relationship with national government. It doesn't allow us to plan. We need 10, 15, 20-year plans to reconceptualize, replan and rebuild our cities so that they're decarbonized, pro-life in terms of taking care of ecology, and inclusive. Until we get more consistency over the kind of financial vehicles that are available to local government, we will be limited in our ability to plan for the future. And when we are making those changes, making sure that we are attaching inclusion and tackling poverty alongside the need to tackle climate change. That gives us the democratic mandate to lead our places to that better future we all want to get to.
Thank you so much, Marvin. It's really good to hear all of the things that are happening in Bristol, and particularly your emphasis on those issues to do with social equity and making sure that this transition is just and fair. Can I move on to Shirley Rodriguez, who's the Deputy Mayor for Energy and Environment at the Greater London Authority. Shirley, obviously, London has been involved in C40 as a global network for a very long time, and you're collaborating internationally with them on the Green New Deal Fund and progress since the Paris Agreement. Shirley.
Thanks, Polly, and to colleagues at UK100 for this fantastic initiative. We've been a long-standing sort of partner with you on many issues, including lobbying government on funding, as Marvin has just talked about, and air pollution, as Nigel has talked about as well. And it's really great to see so much support and interest in the role of local authorities in climate action as we're approaching COP26. We've got a really long history of being ahead of the game when it comes to many things, including climate action. And it was great to see the CCC report yesterday also referencing the importance of cities in helping national governments achieve targets. And what's really important, as many people on the call today have talked about, is collaboration. It's such a powerful force in all that we do, whether it's national or international collaboration, and particularly on climate action, it's really needed. And we can see the importance of collaboration as we respond to COVID-19 and now to the recovery from it. When Sadiq was elected, you know, he made a very specific election manifesto commitment about boosting, regaining, in fact, London's global climate leadership by engaging with global climate networks. And we've had a long track record in London of leading global efforts on climate change that had sort of sadly lapsed. We were the founding city of C40 many years ago, leading that initial charge on climate. And we've been working since then, you know, since Sadiq was elected, to really take part in C40 action. So whether that's at a global level or regionally in Europe, and then also bilaterally with many other cities. We've been working, for example, to establish global city initiatives like our Divest Invest Forum with New York, which is seeing many more cities now committing to divest. And I don't know if many of you saw the announcement from New York yesterday about, you know, one of the massive pension funds now committing to divest by 2025. We've established a C40 Air Quality Network, which is looking at both the sources of air pollution, but also the solutions that we can all take. And that collaboration is really important because we can understand how other cities are attacking these problems and help us to replicate those successes. You know, there's no point in us reinventing the wheel. So learning from each other, sharing best practice is really important. And we've done that, you know, Sadiq's very quick to say that we're very happy to steal other people's ideas. So congestion charging from other cities way back when Ken Livingstone was mayor, and now the ultra low emission zone. But we're also now looking at, you know, how do we tackle scope 3 emissions and how do we look to mobilize more sustainable investment finance into our cities. So working through networks, whether it's global networks like C40 or networks like UK100, are absolutely a brilliant way of understanding what the challenges are, and politically and technically, what are the solutions and tactics to resolving those problems. And it really does create a race to the top. And we're seeing that now with you know, the 33, now 41 cities, and I'm sure there'll be more by the end of the Zoom call. So, you know, that's why it's important. And the other reason that networks are important is they often provide some sort of independent assurance of our achievements and progress. So it's not just us marking our own homework, as Sadiq often says. It's, you know, C40, for example, was able to confirm that London had peaked our emissions and we were on a path to zero carbon. And on the back of that and some of our other ratings, we received a WWF award for leadership in climate action earlier this year. The other thing is, by collaborating, we accelerate action on our climate goals. So initiatives like joint procurement with other cities on electric buses through C40s help lower costs for other cities and then faster rollout of climate measures. And I think Nigel mentioned this as well. You know, local leaders play a massive role in showing governments what is possible. Ambitious climate action, we know, starts in cities before being replicated nationally. And so we have a really important role to play in calling on national governments to raise their climate ambition. So our climate action plan, compatible with the Paris Agreement that we launched a few years ago, alongside other cities like New York and Paris, has put us in a really strong position to justify the call on governments to take faster action and commit to stronger targets. So it was really great to see the UK government now announcing new emissions targets. And then finally, when we set as cities and local authorities bold climate agendas, we can bring others along. We can energize others like the business sector, community sector, individuals, and collectively and cumulatively, that sort of coalition of actions will drive up faster action on climate. And we've been working with organisations like C40, UK100, We Mean Business and CDP to look at what we might do with businesses. We've established in London a Business Climate Leaders, which is helping organisations like Sky and BT and Tesco's to really ramp up their action on what they're doing on climate. And on divestment, like I've mentioned, our work with New York has encouraged 10 other global cities representing 36 million people, to show the investment community that we're serious about divesting from fossil fuels and investing in more green solutions. So this collaboration is massively important in the year of COP, and as we look to recover from COVID-19, that Green New Deal, the green recovery approach that we've been taking, that all the cities of C40 have signed up to, and many of you on the call are also taking action on, is really an area that we really need to push ahead on. So what can UK100 members can do? I'll echo the call that Polly has made and Nigel has talked about. Join up and sign up to the global race to zero. This will help build momentum around the shift to the decarbonised economy we need well ahead of COP, so that when our government and others go into that international conference, we can really ramp up action and protect the people and the planet. Sadiq is going to be leading European cities to sign up on this initiative through our C40, and we really do welcome and encourage all UK100 members to join, and we'd be very happy to share details after this event. Thank you, Polly.
Thank you so much, Shirley. That's really great to hear. I'd like to move on to Councillor Ian Courts, who's a portfolio holder for Environment Energy from the West Midlands Combined Authority, and he's also leader of Solihull Council. The important thing to understand is about the way that those big combined authorities with those metro mayors work, and it'll be good to hear from both Ian Courts and also Jackie Homan, who supports him at the West Midlands Combined Authority, about how you're taking these things forward. Councillor Courts.
Thank you very much, Polly, and it's great to be here. And yes, I'm a twin hatter today. I'm a member of the WMCA and have that responsibility, but also I'm responsible in Solihull Council. I mean, it's an interesting time now with the government 10-point plan on environment, and also the latest carbon budget that came out. In the West Midlands in June last year, I was pleased to get cross-party declaration of climate change, which is really great. But of course, converting this into action is what we must think about. And the West Midlands committed itself to reach net zero carbons by no later than 2041, based on research and work by the Tyndall Centre. But communication and engagement is vital. We launched a public consultation, #WM2041, on 74 actions that we felt needed to be taken. And now we're finalising a 5-year plan that will set the tone and pace of our engagement on a number of priority issues, because frankly, it's the next 5 years that are critical. As other members have said, we have a range of stakeholders that we need to work with. A good example of this is, EV charging points. You need often an approach that goes beyond local authority boundaries. We have determined to be very inclusive in our approach, leave no one behind, and create a better place for our people. And notably, we've brought our young people on board. Our young combined authority has been alongside us, supporting us. Solihull adopted 2030 for its carbon zero on council operations, as well as a 250,000 tree planting as a minimum. And the approach we've taken, and it started some years ago with a climate change prospectus, was it's not just about zero carbon, it's about all environmental issues as a green golden thread going through our operations. Biodiversity, reduction of species, a real problem. Air pollution, which we've talked about, single-use plastics. And also the schools and education. We've twice hosted a model climate change conference with students taking part. In the West Midlands, we're taking a number of actions, and Jackie will be dealing with this. But looking at the built environment, energy efficiency, helping to tackle fuel poverty, and so on, greening our transport. But critically, it's behaviour change that's going to be important, getting people and business on our side if we are to succeed in all this. And an example that we're just developing at the moment is a business pledge. And this is to get businesses signed up to actions. I've made the point of, EV charging points. Supermarkets are the obvious place for them to go. Let's get them signed up to help the coverage of those. The programme will be costly. I'm keen that we target spend on what is effective, ensure we get the results, and most importantly, adopt best practice and be exemplars of good practice. And I think the Zero Carbon Lab Knowledge Hub is a great point here, because we really need to learn from others and not be proud in terms of what we can get from others. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague Jackie to talk more specifically about WM.
Thank you, Councillor Courts. Councillor Courts referenced the Zero Carbon Lab Knowledge Hub. And at the Combined Authority, we've been collaborating with colleagues from UK100 and other local authorities and organisations who are keen to explore how we get to zero and the kinds of projects and programmes we need to put in place. I've worked in both local and now regional authorities, and one of the things that has always benefited the work that I've done and the way I've worked is being able to interact and collaborate with others, be that private sector, but also understanding what other local and regional authorities are doing, and to really understand the kinds of projects and programmes that they're putting in place, because we're largely all tackling very similar issues, whether that's retrofit, whether that is low emission vehicles, whether that's biodiversity net gain. So to understand actually what works and what doesn't work, and to work in partnership with others, has been really important to me, and also to being able to put in some of the best projects and programmes now at the Combined Authority. So understanding what works well, and Councillor Courts mentioned the wide range of actions that we've got to put in place, but not only the actions themselves, but understanding how we finance them, how we communicate, how we work with behaviour change programmes to get them put in place. So the Zero Carbon Lab Knowledge Hub that's been launched by UK100 today as well is a collection of case studies from local authorities, and we've contributed a number around tree planting, circular economy, zero carbon homes as examples of some of the work that we're doing. Will be a really important repository of information for us all to learn from in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and for some of us to showcase the work that we're doing. So it's been a really great opportunity to collaborate with UK100 and others to help us move our programme in the West Midlands forward, but as part of a much bigger initiative, as people have alluded to. But being able to work in partnership is critical.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Jackie. It's really good to hear how much progress there has been made in places like the West Midlands. And I'll finally turn to Carl Ennis, the Chief Executive of Siemens for Great Britain and Northern Ireland. This is important. Remember to pose your questions in the Q&A chat for this panel, because then we'll spend a short time taking answers from them. And as we have been speaking, 5 local authorities have volunteered to sign up in the chat just during this conversation. So the momentum really is moving. It's very exciting. So Carl, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Polly. And it's only a shame that I'm not a local authority, because I'd like to sign. In our defence, I would say that Siemens made a commitment in 2014. We made a commitment to net carbon zero by 2030, and by the end of this year, we've achieved 50% reduction already. So it's absolutely key. But thank you for the opportunity to contribute, Polly, to the conversation. From Siemens' perspective, we've been working with a number of local councils and authorities and LEPs over the last 2 years in particular, and in those conversations and activities, we've helped them with their energy strategies, and I think that's unlocked three things for us. First of all, is the scale of the challenge of net zero, which I think we're all starting to come to terms with. Other people have talked about air quality is an important thing. We looked at some of the data from our traffic sensors and notified that in lockdown, even though we almost crippled our economy, we saw a 20% reduction in CO2 emissions and a 40% reduction in NOx emissions. So the scale of what you have to do to impact air quality and reduce our CO2 emissions sort of is really important. We also worked with those local authorities on projects, on concrete project models to deliver on net carbon zero, and really importantly is it's often seen in a negative way. There are values and unlocking those values for local government, whether those be inward investment on job creation, critically important for cities going forward. We also identified, and some has been mentioned earlier, the importance of looking at this from a whole systems approach. So looking at the entirety, you can't just look at energy, you do have to look at heat, transport, and other systems. And we've delivered on some good examples over that period, whether that be Triangulum with the colleagues in Greater Manchester, also at Keele University with an energy network demonstrator. I think the challenges we've identified in working with those, well, first of all, I would say it's not, sadly, it's not an engineering challenge. So it would be nice to say it's just engineering. It's not. The two challenges, one is one of from a commercial organisation interacting with cities, is that one of coordination and actually working out who to speak to and having a coordinated response is a challenge, particularly when the answer to net carbon zero is not a single project, but as I mentioned before, a whole systems approach. And the second is funding. And also responsibility, devolution of responsibility, which I think is terribly important. Funding is interesting, actually. It's not a topic of that there is private capital around that is interested in investing in projects for net carbon zero, but it requires stable policy. So that stable policy, that stable pipeline is exceedingly important to attract that private capital, which is absolutely there in the right set of circumstances, and we've shown that's the case. The great example, and I'll finish with this, is just the offshore wind topic, where it required a pump priming activity from central government, but once it was up and running, it's the second cheapest form of renewable energy, and we wouldn't have thought that 10 years ago. So these challenges are possible, but they require stability.
Thank you so much, Carl. And we've just got a very short amount of time for questions. Fortunately, people have been upvoting, so I can see which ones are the most popular. I'm going to take 3, and then I'm going to ask the panel to answer the ones that work for them. Ryan Lung has asked a question which has been the most popular. From a local leader's point of view, what is the biggest barrier for local authorities to achieve their net zero target? I think that's really important. We've had one question that's been asked twice by different councillors before the session, which I think is probably a good example of how important it is. How can local authorities effectively manage to balance the financial impact of coronavirus, severe cuts of up to 40% in local government, with the need for climate action in our communities? So that's one, is what's the biggest barrier? How do you manage coronavirus and financial impacts? And the third one is, where does the funding for these ambitions come from? So that might end up being a bit similar by Mark Chadwick. Somebody else has asked, are councils committed to working with energy networks to, and I think this might be one that Carl might be able to speak to ensure their net zero plans are aligned with reinforcements to the network, because you obviously have to deal with some of that technical stuff. So I think we've got 3 there, really. How do you deal with the finances and coronavirus? What is the biggest barrier, and who is talking to who about working with energy networks to ensure that net zero happens? Shall we start with you, Carl, and then we'll go to the other panelists?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is it has to be an integrated approach. I mean, the role of the network operator is changing, and there are a real engagement with Ofgem at the moment to get them to consider themselves as more in history just a wires business, but also a solutions business. And so there is a change happening in that area. And I think, we do have to challenge the system operators, the network operators, to become system operators. And I think it's that challenge that is making them think about how they engage. So there's no quick answer to that, because we're changing what has been a top-down model in terms of energy delivery over many years to actually something that now really needs to be bottom up at best, and in an ideal scenario, actually, both directions. But the network operator has a role to play, definitely.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to go to Shirley, Marvin, and Councillor Courts on the questions of the barriers and the finance. And then somebody else has asked a really good question. It would be good to hear about some commitments to not do the bad stuff as well as doing the good stuff. So if you can think of one thing that you're not doing, as well as doing the good stuff. That would be helpful. So let's start with Shirley, Marvin, and then Councillor Courts, please. And then I'd like a question for Nigel, if anyone can post one in the Q&A, that'd be great.
Polly, I don't know if you want me to answer all three, but I'll start with the biggest barrier. For us, it's powers and funding. Devolve the powers and funding to local authority leaders, city mayors, because we know what needs to happen. We know what the solutions are. We've got our plans. Just sort of get out of the way and let us get on with it. And where we've got powers, we get on with it and are taking action. In terms of how we balance the finances, well, in London, we're struggling with that now, just as many other local authority leaders are too. You've seen the big cuts in transport, ridership on Transport for London, that's impacting our plans for rollout. But I guess it's about prioritisation and recognising that many of the solutions are multifaceted. So the electrification of our vehicle, more rolling out of rapid charge points and standard charge points will help both our air pollution problem, but also help with meeting our carbon emissions reductions, but also help our economy in driving more green jobs as well. So I think I'll leave it there. I think those are the two questions. Yeah.
Great. And what about anything that you're not doing?
What aren't we doing? We're doing lots of things. So we're saying we're not going to be supporting any developments, any new developments in London that are not zero carbon. And we've already got a policy that's working. We're getting developers saying and committing to meet reduce emissions on their new developments 40% above building regulation requirements already, and we're extending that to new developments now. So that just shows some policies that we can take, long-term policies that drive long-term thinking by developers and investors, really make a difference, and we need government to get behind us and support us in doing that.
Great. Marvin. Are you there, Marvin?
My apologies.
It's all right. Don't worry.
Yeah, whipping through. It takes a whole city approach. One of the points I've made to campaign groups in Bristol is that tackling climate as Bristol is not down to the local authority alone. I think sometimes people think that world good and world evil end with government. There's a whole range of sovereign organisations in Bristol, from universities, private sector, police to hospitals, that shape climate. So we have to get a joined up approach, and then it's money. We faced the decision, I'll tell you, the other day where we were looking at our budget, how we were going to balance it. And because we were struggling, we started to look at some of the investment we were making in other areas. And one of those was climate. We put £4 or £5 million aside for climate. Some of it was going to be spent in a couple of years' time. We say, well, should we go and take some of that money from a few years away and balance our budget with it today on the money to spend on crisis services? So our finance is hugely significant. Where do I get it from? We need it from government. And as Shirley said, front load that investment in decarbonising our city systems. Do it now. We can generate jobs through that, and we can make sure that whatever recovery comes our way is decarbonised, pro-nature, pro-inclusive. But that government can also de-risk investment that give us the platform to get private sector investment as well. And actually, I would say too, to networks like C40 and so forth, there are lots of ferociously wealthy people out there with huge networks of investors. Why don't you get those investors, put them in a big Zoom call with mayors who want to get stuff done, and let's do the deal. If I just go to more events where mayors are telling each other stories about community projects, I'll go mad. Because the first question you ask is, how much does that cost? That's what it's all about. We've got best practice coming out of our ears. It's paying to make it real that counts. And what we're not doing, here's a risk for us. We have a housing crisis. We need to deliver 35,000 affordable homes by 2036. The ferociously efficient net zero homes are more expensive. So what do? Do we give up 10 homes because they're not, do we have a scheme that's got 240 rather than 280 homes and say, we know we haven't got those affordable homes for people? Or do we stay pure? Again, money needs to come forward to help us navigate that. Those are the real challenges of local governance.
That's fantastic, Marvin. So helpful to hear that, particularly all this best practice is like, show us the money. Councillor Courts, what do you think?
Well, money's always going to be there as a big ask, isn't it? But the reality is, money's required for many things, and what we have to get much better at is to understand what the best use of that money is in the environmental situation. And not all of these things cost money, and better planning can also help with this. For instance, I mean, planning regs are not very strong on the climate change front. But I mean, if we were to plan and say, well, in 3 years' time, certain things must happen, like carbon neutral homes, like better infrastructure, that would be costed into the cost of land in the first place. And landowners and developers would know they need to plan it rather than the knee-jerk reaction that I'm afraid we see. A second point is actually on communications and buy-in. I mean, many things can be done without money. I mean, tree planting is an example. I mean, the cost of a tree is a few pounds. Finding the land to put it on is something different. We need landowners to engage in this. We need our plan of £250,000, for instance. We'll do it. I'm convinced we'll do it, but we'll need buy-in from landowners to do it. So, it doesn't all cost money, is the point I'm making.
That's great. That's fantastic. And I've got one question specifically for Nigel, which is, what does a successful COP26 look like from the point of view of establishing UK climate leadership?
Yeah, good question. I think first thing is important. Sometimes the media still say that COP is where the world's leaders come together to renegotiate a climate treaty. So that's not true. Basically, the deal was done in Paris. So there is not a big renegotiation at an international level. So there are 3 different things happening between now and Glasgow. One is there is a multilateral negotiation. It's mostly technical finalization of the Paris rule books and very technical issues around international carbon markets and transparency stuff. It's also holding the global north to account for some promises they've made in the past, which is very relevant because it's a consensus process, and the global south have very strong views on whether or not those commitments have been met. So there's a multilateral bit. Then there's the national governments stepping up their commitments, which is really happening right now. In fact, on Saturday, the UN and the UK and France and Chile are hosting this Climate Ambition Summit. But of course, we'll have another year to continue ratcheting that. And then the third bit is what you're all doing. It's the sort of whole of society approach. So success in Glasgow will be the multilateral negotiations are completed in an inclusive, and the manner is as important as the outcome in some ways, right? Because it's an inclusive process where the small island states that are literally drowning feel listened to and included in those conversations. So second of all, that there's a significant step up in national ambition, and there things look good, right? With UK, EU, China, a Biden administration, Japan, Korea, we've got suddenly political tailwinds there. And then thirdly, it's what's happening in the real economy on the ground as all of you are grappling with, what are the actual decisions being made? Where's the actual money flowing to ramp up action on the ground? And if all 3 of those are seen to be really moving forward in a much more positive way than they were a year ago, then I think the COP will be seen as a success and the first proof that the Paris Agreement and the ratchet mechanism and the welcoming of non-state actors into the sort of big tent are actually working to get us on track towards net zero by 2050.
Thank you, Nigel. That's really helpful. I think what's very interesting about talking about the communities in other parts of the world that are literally, going underwater as a consequence of climate change, people seem to think that climate change only happens to other people somewhere else at another time. And we're actually seeing extreme weather conditions in this country now. And that is actually driving a lot of our local leaders to act, because they see the consequences. If a bridge goes down in a small town, that can actually devastate the economy here. And the consequences for people who now can't get their homes insured because of rapid floods is now something that is a reality in the UK. So yes, we can actually build a global conversation about social equity, which includes those extreme climate impacts across different kinds of countries and different communities.
Yeah, I mean, Emma Howard-Boyd, who leads the Environment Agency, was always making that point that we need to avoid adaptation and resilience being tagged as a global south only issue, that we have plenty of adaptation and resilience needs in the global north. We have plenty of climate vulnerable communities, as I know that everyone on the call knows, and as you say, Polly, here in the UK. So yeah, good point.
And also that climate mitigation helps with some of the many of the worst things. I mean, I've had situations where people have said, oh, we can't possibly put solar panels on our area because it's a conservation area. I said, you won't have anything to conserve, love, if the Thames gets any higher. So it'd be quite a good idea to be able to get on with it while making your homes more comfortable for extreme weather conditions, which are probably inevitable now. Thanks so much. That was such a great conversation. I want to be able to move on to our second panel. The funny thing about these Zoom calls is we don't get an opportunity to clap people, and I really want to be able to clap our panel because they were so good. We got so much information out of them. And can I also welcome the conversations we're having, both the chat and the Q&A. This is such a rich conversation with so many people who are keen to be able to make this local leadership a reality and who've got good ideas and good commitments already happening in real life. So I just want to be able to, if we can't clap each other, just remember that this is a point at which we would normally clap each other. And moving on to the second part of the session. Now, we've talked a lot about the what, and now this is the how, but I've just been reminded that we've got the local leadership club up. Now, we haven't updated this with the 5 that have just committed over the chat. We thought that might be a bit premature, but just to have a look at that list of the people that have committed over the past few days, I think we've managed to get Stroud District Council, who came in last night, Sandwell Metropolitan Council and the London Borough of Southwark all came in last night. So we've got places as diverse as Bath, as Liverpool City Region, as Westminster City Council, as Reading Borough Council, and and Milton Keynes, Glasgow, Gloucestershire, Cambridgeshire. This is Staffordshire Moorlands. This is such an amazing movement, and we're really keen to be able to get as many others signed up as possible to make sure that we are really demonstrating that ambition. We are going to also save the chat, as somebody said, because we definitely think the chat is really helpful for everybody, not least of all us, because there's been so many good contributions. So let's go on to the second panel. And then I'd like to introduce for this Andy Kerr, who is the Director of Climate Kick in UK and Ireland. The title of this is about collaborating for net zero. So we know that there are many individual things that need to happen, but there is no one big lever. We need to be able to transform our communities all together. So Andy is going to lead the conversation about working in partnership with cities and local leaders to translate those ambitions into action. Andy.
Thanks very much, Polly, and a very good morning to everyone. I know there's a saying going around, I don't know its provenance, but it goes something like nations claim, but cities and regions deliver, which seems very apt in the year running up to COP. We've heard a lot about the importance of political leadership this morning, which is critical, but the flip side to leadership is delivery. And could you put the next slide on, please? So I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes outlining some of the issues that we see with delivery and the challenge of delivery and how we can overcome it. And in particular, how we can use innovation, not as a little nice to have on the side on a bit of tech, but actually how we drive change in whole systems. So Climate Kick is a big public-private innovation partnership. We and our partners, and you'll be hearing from a number of the partners shortly, have been supporting some of the most ambitious cities, regions, local authorities across Europe and in the UK, sort of ranging from Madrid to Milan, from Edinburgh to Enfield. And what we want to do is just reflect on some of the activities that we've been doing over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. So what do? We co-design, we co-develop a connected, a coordinated portfolio of interventions. And what we're trying to do is to test and drive levers or enablers of change. And that's within local authorities, within cities, within regions. And the point being that these levers of change, as we've heard earlier this morning, range from anything from governance, have we actually got the governance right, through to the regulations, the policy frameworks, to the social engagements, the social behaviors, new financial models, new lead markets for skills and so on. So it's trying to get beyond this notion that there is one single silver bullet, that if only we do this, or there's a tech that we can apply and it will solve the problem. But we start to address the fact that we've got big complex systems we're working with, and we actually need to look at the whole system and deliver innovation systematically across all of that. The point of this is that the delivery challenge to get to net zero within a decade is so great that none of us have all of the answers. It doesn't matter how good a consultant's brief or a roadmap might look. So there will always be a strong element of learning by doing. And open learning with peers, so peer-to-peer sharing of what is working, what is not, in order for us to scale the types of solutions that we need to be applying very, very rapidly. This, of course, brings itself some real challenges, given things like risk appetite within local authorities, given capabilities and capacities to work across and within organizations as well as across multiple organizations, particularly after a decade of austerity. Next slide, please. Sorry, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So let me just pick 3 examples, and we've already heard a number of comments. I think Marvin, Reece in particular flagged all 3 of these actually, but these are just 3 of the specific cross-cutting issues that we keep on hearing when we're working with local authorities in the UK. The first is what we call an investment mindset. You know, with annual tight or falling budgets, with a cost mindset, with looking at incremental changes, with departmental silos, we will not deliver radical transformative change in that context. So we do need to get that change from thinking about public sector annual budgets to thinking, what is the investment that we require over 10, 15, 20 years to fundamentally reshape that entire place that we live in? Yeah, so that we've got to start looking at the long-term annuity, the benefits that come back, not just carbon, not just climate, but skills, jobs, warm, affordable homes, and so on. And how then do we build the public-private funds? And there's no shortage of private capital out there to deliver on that. The second one is the system thinking. Again, if we only try and solve the climate problem, we will not deliver this transformation. We have to be thinking about the jobs, the skills, the community well-being. If you're looking at things like anything from retrofit of buildings, we need to be thinking about the public realm, the public space, the green space. We need to be thinking about community wealth building. We need to be rethinking how we're working and our travel into work and things like that. So we've got to look at it at a systems perspective. And the third is around civic legitimacy. We cannot keep continuing to do climate action onto communities. It has to be delivered and designed with communities. In other words, they have to get that. We have to get that, not just buy-in, but they have to be helping to drive this. And so I just think that anybody who's tried to put in place, you know, a low traffic neighborhood and has had to take the political heat around that will appreciate this is hugely challenging. But for us, these are the feedbacks and the delivery challenges that we are now starting to see how we can solve, but we need to be then applying these and develop these going forward. Next slide, please. So I just really want to finish with an offer, and you'll be hearing from a few partners talking about specific technical areas that they've got real expertise in. But let me just finish with an offer that we as Climate Kick, our partners, UK100, the places we're working with, are basically saying, look, come and join us. None of us have all of the answers. None of us pretend to know exactly how you will solve your problem in your place. But what we do have is a series of approaches. We have ways of learning by doing. We have shared experiences from a range of different players who can actually start to help you build that learning by doing approach, which will actually get you to your ambitious goal. And that's ranging from developing investment funds, developing deep community co-design, some of the technical expertise we're about to hear about shortly. So, you know, I believe that we can actually collectively deliver some extraordinary targets over the next 10 years. But let's do that together. Let's actually share and amplify the opportunity that we have working together. So next slide, please. So I'll stop there. I'll let some of my partners, talk about some of their experiences, but please do get in contact. We're open and looking to build a delivery partnership over the next few years.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andy. I just want to move rapidly on to Martha, because we've got lots of intelligence here from both Martha at University College London, to the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, before we go on to the other speakers. Martha.
Hi everybody, good morning. My name is Martha McPherson. I head up Green Economy at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. We're not a local authority, we're a research and teaching department at UCL, but we work in partnership with a lot of local authorities. And we kind of start from, next slide please, we kind of start from the point of view of doing some economic rethinking. So taking it a little bit back to economic theory, and I'll start there and I'll get more concrete, I promise. But we start from the point of view that economic growth doesn't just have a rate, the rate that the government focuses on, the entrepreneurs focus on, that business gets very excited about. It doesn't just have a rate, it also has a direction. The rate is usually what's measured, but the direction is what matters. And the direction of economic growth is cumulative. It depends on what's gone before. It's very much path dependent. And it depends on innovation and economic activity over the past, however many hundreds of years, and to get us to where we are now and the challenges that we face. But what you can do with the direction of growth is that you can point it, you can redirect, you can point it towards addressing society's largest challenges today, towards climate, towards aging demographics, towards pandemics that we're living through. And governments, especially local governments, a huge role to play in this kind of redirecting of markets, this co-shaping, co-ownership of economic markets, along with business, along with citizens. And it's very much embedded in this concept of systems change theory that Andy was talking through as well. But what's needed for local governments to take on this big economic direction opportunity is really rethinking and re-understanding how they talk about and think about their roles within the economic system. So it's kind of getting to a new vocabulary for local governments, rather than thinking that governments, both local, national, international, are tinkering around the edges of the market, kind of putting in a carbon tax here and there, which is all fantastic work and needs to be done. They're not just fixing them, but they are also big, ambitious, kind of in a big, ambitious way, co-creating, co-shaping them, rather than thinking of governments as just de-risking and letting the private sector get on with all the exciting innovation things. Governments can really welcome uncertainty, and this is something that historically, in previous transitions, into industrial revolution, in things like the tech transition, tech revolution, governments have been really at the heart of doing some of this early stage risky funding, and getting stuck into looking for new innovation opportunities and supporting those in the earliest days. We've done a lot of work at the Institute on things like GPS, the iPhone, all these different technologies that at their heart you can find early stage government investment, early stage government innovation, the role of the state as its own entrepreneur. So this is where I'll start from, and I want to share kind of an example of how we've worked with a local authority, with Greater Manchester Combined Authority, next slide please, how these kinds of approaches, this idea of shaping a market, can be undertaken by a city region using one specific mechanism. And there are lots of different ways that we can think about how governments do this, but this is one that's been quite well developed at the Institute, and it's called mission-oriented innovation. So mission-oriented innovation identifies a challenge, sets a challenge like climate change, and you can see in this diagram here on the left, kind of roadmap, rough roadmap, and it sets a long-term goal against that challenge. And this is a goal that is agreed between governments and business, is cross-sectoral, it's concrete, it's ambitious, it aims to crowd in multiple investment from public sector to mobilize the private sector. And it aims to set out a long-term political space beyond political cycles. So when Greater Manchester undertook analysis in 2017-2018, understand how it could pay its fair share to the Paris Agreement using the scatter tool that I guess many of you may have experimented with, they got to a carbon neutrality outcome of 2038. They wanted to be carbon neutral by that time. But whilst they realized that was the outcome they needed to get to, they found a big innovation gap in the middle of doing that. They worked closely with us to try and understand what sectors need to be called into play, what kind of bottom-up innovation, talent and skills and projects need to be funded to get to that outcome. And the key thing here to learn from the way that we thought about things in Greater Manchester was that rather than taking a sector-led approach only, kind of going in, just looking at the high carbon industries or funding low carbon technical alternatives, which are also ways forward, we got to much more of a kind of different and systemic outcome that was very much based on citizens. So it's not just, and it might be quite small on the page, but you can see that the mission is not just about being a carbon neutral city region by 2038, but it's having carbon neutral living within the Greater Manchester city region. So you wake up in Greater Manchester, you have a carbon neutral breakfast, you go to work on a carbon neutral commute, you go to your carbon neutral office. It's much more about how people live together in the system. And this was built on listening events and summits, free green summits hosted with citizens, with activists, with business, And it also means that messages, the kind of metrics that you're using need to start changing. You're not just looking at measuring a project, doing a cost benefit analysis on a single project or a suite of projects, and then kind of assessing whether the project should go forward, was successful, looking at kind of those very kind of static ways of thinking about project management. Instead, you're looking at whole systems. How are citizens' lives changing on a day-to-day basis? And this is hard. This is really hard. Missions are not an easy way of doing this kind of work, because you do have to take on that bigger view.
Thank you, Martha. I'm just very conscious of time. Can you wrap up, please?
Yeah, I was just about to say, and open for questions about how this has worked and how it can work in other places too. So thank you so much for all joining and listening to this.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Martha. Can I move swiftly on to Fergus Worthy, who is the General Manager of Cenex in Scotland. Fergus.
Thank you very much, Polly. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to UK100 and the Climate Kick for organising this event and inviting me to present. I represent Cenex. We are also not a local authority. We're a not-for-profit research organisation and consultancy, but we work with local authorities and the wider public sector to reduce emissions from transport and the energy systems that sit behind transport, and to help those organisations reach their net zero targets. And I've been asked to give a whistle-stop presentation of kind of what local authorities are doing around the decarbonisation of urban mobility, and also just to highlight a few examples of best practice. So there's three trends, I guess I would pick out that are certainly underway at the moment, but that I would expect to accelerate as we move into the 2020s. The first and the most obvious is of course electrification. You know, we're clearly at a stage now where it's when and not if we will shift to electric road transport. And if you look at the latest new vehicle registrations from SMMT, they show an increase in EV sales of 184% in September compared to September last year, which is impressive enough. But then when you put that in the context of actually, you know, overall vehicle sales are obviously significantly down year on year, it really shows just how fast that changeover is starting to happen. And the work local authorities have done to develop charge point networks is absolutely key to driving that increase. The second, Talia, if you can click next, is around shared mobility. So car clubs have been around for a while, numbers are steadily increasing, but I think over the last year what we've seen is some really good examples of deployments in what we might perhaps describe as sort of hard to reach or overlooked areas, rural communities, lower income areas of cities, and I would just highlight Nottingham in particular here. They've worked with their car club provider Enterprise to deploy vehicles in low income areas of the city, which is something that car club providers have previously perhaps been slightly hesitant to do, and that scheme has worked really well. Within that, we're also seeing local authorities working with car club providers on EV as well, and again there's a key role to play here to make sure that spaces are available where EV infrastructure can be installed at a reasonable cost. And the third trend, Talia, is around active travel. And here, I think this year, COVID has just accelerated the pace of redeployment of space to support walking and cycling. And a really good example of this is in Glasgow, where the council has reallocated something around 25 kilometres of curbside road lanes in the city centre for walking and cycling, plus other measures like cycle routes through the city centre and the installation of additional on-street parking facilities. So those three key themes, electric, shared and active, and in some best cases, it's all three of those. For example, these co-bikes, electric bike share scheme in Exeter, which again, you know, there's not that many of those at the moment, but it's something we expect to see more of as we move into the next decade. Next slide, Talia, please. I also just want to share an example of best practice from the West Midlands. This is some work we've been involved with this year. What we see here is a group of local authorities working together to develop and implement a plan to decarbonise urban mobility. And this speaks to the point that Councillor Courts was making about this being more successful if local authorities work beyond their individual boundaries. And again, the work UK100 is doing to bring local authorities together through their pledges is really key here. So what makes this such a good example? First is that collaborative working. Second, it's having a clear and ambitious end goal to reach net zero in 2030, together with an accurate baseline, what vehicles are on the road and their emissions, and a strategy and an action plan to get from A to B. The plan involves all vehicle types, including, again, those hard to reach areas like freight and taxis. It's not just about the mobility of private individuals. Significant planned investment in charging infrastructure, and that's covering a range of different types from slow to ultra rapid. A public engagement program early on in the piece, because behaviour change will be absolutely crucial to success. And lastly, leading by example as well, by the councils changing their own fleets over to EVs early in the programme. Next slide, Talia. I'll wrap up there because I'm conscious of time. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to find out more about those examples or the work that Cenex does, please do get in touch. We can really help you turn the pledges that you've made over the last few weeks into action plans that will get you to net zero. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Fergus. And I'll move swiftly on to Jenny Holland from the UK Green Buildings Council.
Thank you very much, Polly. We've heard so much this morning about collaboration. What can UKGBC add to the mix? Well, I think it's our ability to bring the most progressive built environment businesses together with local government to help ensure that policies and programmes are both ambitious and deliverable from the perspective of those on the ground. So just a few examples now of that kind of collaboration drawn from our recent and continuing work. Starting in the retrofit space, a major project in 2020 has been our Accelerator Cities programme, on which we've worked with Climate Kick, UK100, and a great array of other partners to support local and combined authorities to take decisive action on home retrofit. A couple of weeks ago, we released an online map, and you can see a tiny weeny version of it there on the slide, which highlights best practice retrofit policies and programmes across the country. It's a live resource, so if you don't see your local authority featured and you think it should be there, please let us know. Alongside the map, we've published a comprehensive playbook of guidance for local authorities. Running in parallel with Accelerator Cities is the Cross-European Build Upon 2 project, which over the last year has developed a renovation framework to enable local authorities to better capture the impacts and benefits of retrofit projects. It covers a wide range of indicators from carbon, indoor air quality and thermal comfort to economic benefits like job creation. We're now piloting the framework with Leeds City Council and we'll be running pilots with other local authorities next year. Turning to the new build space, for almost 3 years now, local authorities have been using our new build playbook to help them use planning policy to drive up sustainability standards in new homes. We're now about to publish a significantly updated version reflecting the new context in which we're operating, hugely increased ambition on the part of many local authorities, along with likely movement at long last from national government on building regulations. The new playbook will be accompanied by a new build version of the interactive map, so watch out for it, second week in January. Finally, in recent years, we've also entered into partnerships with individual local authorities to bring the expertise of our industry network to bear on specific development and regeneration opportunities. Currently, we've got a really exciting new partnership with Enfield Council and Climate Kick again to deliver what we call the Foreground programme at Meridian Water in North London. This project is aiming to tackle kind of head on the issue that so many local authorities are facing. We know what sustainability looks like on exemplar trailblazing schemes, but how do we deliver that in practice within constrained budgets? And finally, I shouldn't finish without saying that we understand all too well that there's a limit to what local government can do without greater support from central government. And we've heard so much about this morning, which is why we've always had and will continue to have a very active programme of national advocacy. Working together, we can and we will get this right.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you so much. And finally, but last but not least, is Richard Helsi from Energy Systems Catapult. Richard.
Thanks, Polly, and afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard Helsi. I'm a director at the National Energy Systems Catapult, and we're one of a wider network of innovation agencies with a specific focus on transformation of the energy system, but also realising the opportunities of our race to net zero. If you go to the next slide, I'm not going to dwell too much. I think we've sort of probably covered the challenges quite well, I think, over the last hour or so. So just recognising that the Catapult, we see how we actually translate those ambitions, those pledges into reality, into action on the ground is absolutely critical if we are going to deliver net zero, and that doing that in a coordinated, integrated way and ensuring that the solutions and the investments that we make actually collectively add up to net zero is absolutely critical. And I think making a sort of picking up on a point that was made earlier, ensuring that the way that we do that is cost efficient. That isn't necessarily always lowest cost, but ensuring that the investments we make represent value for money for all of us, and particularly you know, in the context of the bills that we're going to have to pay in the future, to make sure that we have you know, places and energy systems that work for us and give us the outcomes that we want. So if you go on to the next slide, one of the key kind of concepts that the Catapult that we've been collaborating with a number of local authorities and various organisations on is the development of more integrated whole system local area energy planning as a mechanism for defining what we need to do, where we need to do it, and when we need to do it. And we see that as one of the critical building blocks, and we see local authorities and local government as a really critical kind of central convener and facilitator of the development of those plans. I think it was mentioned earlier about the importance of connecting with energy networks, and we see a mechanism by which we could bring together gas distribution network operators, electricity distribution network operators, heat network operators, retrofit businesses, consumers and citizens into a planning process to help define what we need to do and ensure that collectively those interventions add up to net zero. Most recently, we've been working with Ofgem and the Centre for Sustainable Energy, building on the work that they've been doing in Bristol to develop a method for what local area energy planning might look like if it was done well, and also how we might leverage and unlock the opportunities and benefits from increasingly open data from various different sources and take a more digitally enabled and data-driven approach to the planning of our kind of net zero future in different places. If you go on to the next slide, what we see, I think, is absolutely critical is how we though take that planning foundation and enable different places to move that through into design and ultimately the delivery of smart local energy, smarter, more integrated local energy systems. So at the moment, we're working with a wide range of local authorities to think about what could a toolkit be to work through that journey of defining the ambitions, but then understanding what those options and choices are, what the different investments are, where they sit within the city, how they add up together and support net zero, how you can connect with the supply chain and the delivery and implementation of those, but also how you can potentially connect with citizens and communities in a more sophisticated, digitally enabled way to support on our ambitions. And I think, Polly, I'll leave it there in conscious of time and hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. We are very, very short on time on this Q&A, but I'd like to ask one particular question, which I think will be answerable by everybody on the panel, from Helen Pierce. What are the 3 most impactful changes that central government could make to enable climate action? So within your area, 3 things. You don't even have to go up to 3 because there might be fewer, but they would make significant difference to the ability of local leaders to be able to act on climate. Can I start with you, Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Polly. I mean, I think that the issue is a mindset shift that will be the most impactful, in the sense that they have to start thinking about delivery over the next 10 years. At the moment, they're still lost in policy and strategy. And if you want central government actually to support local government, they have to empower them. And that is all about a mindset shift, that actually these are the key enablers for making things happen on the ground in practice, which will deliver our targets. And I still don't see that coming through in any of their papers, their strategies and so on. You know, even the COP26 themes don't have place at the heart of it. It's these horizontal themes like EVs and so on. When we start thinking about how do we actually deliver change on the ground, you have to operate through those agents of change, and the key one here are local authorities.
Can I go to Jenny next, then Richard, Fergus and Martha, in that order?
Long-term certainty. That's what the government needs to deliver for industry, for local authorities, for everyone. There's been too much in the past of, you know, stop-start funding programs, stop-start policy making, so that no one has a clue what's going to be coming along in a year's time, let alone 10 years' time. So long-term certainty about the decarbonisation, energy and carbon agendas. Second one, but if I'm allowed, the government must take steps to ensure kind of longer term consumer demand. So that's around things like stamp duty incentives, it's clear trajectories around the private sector minimum standards, restoring the 5% rate of VAT on energy saving products, all of those kinds of things. So I'll leave it there because I think we probably all
Richard.
say.
Yeah, thanks, Polly. I've probably got three fairly simple ones. A clear structured framework that connects national strategy and policy to local implementation, a clear long-term direction of travel in relation to incentives on the regulatory framework, and also putting some effort and time and money into developing solutions that consumers and businesses will buy and value that are low carbon or zero carbon.
Great. Fergus.
Yes, I've got two. So the first, there's a lot of lessons we can learn from government action on air quality over the last few years. So there were some moves to kind of devolve powers by allowing local authorities to develop their own clean air zones. But for a lot of local authorities, they say, well, the clean air zone isn't the best solution for us. We've got other options. And that then caused tension between those cities and central government. So it's really about providing that local power in the right way. And the second one, funding. Yes, more money needs to be made available, but it needs to be the right type of money. There's been lots of capital available from central government, but with budget cuts, local authorities don't necessarily have the resources to spend that, and it can't be used for revenue, and that's a big issue. So I would say devolution and the right type of funding would be my two.
Fantastic. Martha.
Yeah, I would say I think there's two things to do. One is this long-termism point is very, very true. If the central government is not thinking long-term, it's very difficult for local authorities to make their own long-term plans. And then secondly, I think making sure that these kind of conversations, especially around climate, don't just sit within BEIS. It needs to be wider. You need to be talking to other ministries and making sure that things like budgets, things like procurement are lined up between them so that you're pointing everything in this direction, not just some parts of government.
That's really fantastic. So I'm going to wrap the Q&A up there because we're coming towards the end of our time. I think we can all continue the conversation online at #COP26local. We're going to save that chat because we have had such a rich conversation there, and also among the questions, and hopefully be able to answer some of those questions in the future. If you have not yet signed up to the Net Zero Local Leadership Pledge, there is the opportunity by emailing membership@UK100.org. And the Collaboration for Net Zero project that you have seen showcased by the speakers that we've just heard from is also taking a form on the UK100 website of a knowledge hub, where we are bringing together the best case studies from our members. And importantly, we are making sure that those case studies are authored by decision makers in local authorities. So this is by people who have to make the final decision, and speaks exactly to what Andy has said about making sure that you are and Marvin earlier, and Councillor Courts from the West Midlands, that you are meeting the needs of communities now. So tackling poverty, creating jobs, improving health are all things that are done quicker, faster and better if you do them in a climate way, because you really embed those changes into your community. And that's what we're showcasing on our website. If you have case studies along those lines, let us know, and we will work with you to write something that's properly authored by your elected decision makers to do so. We have that net zero pledge. Remember to sign up to that. And if you want to have more support on the work that we're doing up to COP26 and you're a business, then you can get in touch with us to become part of our business supporters network. You can use our info@uk100.org email for that. And remember that net zero partnership, that collaborating for net zero, you can get in touch with the partners. That's University College London, Climate Kick, Cenex, UK Green Buildings Council and Energy Systems Catapult, who are all there to help with that technical support that is required in order to be able to deliver. None of this can happen without the collaboration with business, as demonstrated by our partnership with Siemens, the commitment of our members, as demonstrated by the fact that we now have more than 40 committed to a more ambitious pledge, and the work that that we do with partners such as the Collaborating for Net Zero partnership, which enables some of that technical know-how to get faster to local authorities. But there are people who have no more understanding, no better understanding about what this means for their communities than the people who have to make the decisions. That's why we collaborate with those elected leaders and make sure that they can not only have the confidence to be able to deliver, but the know-how to, and make sure that national government understands. When we ask that question about when Helen asked that question about what are the 3 things that national government could do, our net zero pledges have committed to use everything within their power and influence to be able to reach net zero. But they won't be able to get all the way without significant changes from national government in terms of regulation and policy. We are keen to be able to help shape what those changes should be so that local leaders can do so much more. We look forward to working with you on that in the build up to COP26, and in particular, thank the speakers that we've had this morning, because without them, we wouldn't be able to demonstrate that kind of commitment that we have all seen today. So I'd like to thank Nigel, our keynote speaker. I'd like to thank Marvin, Shirley, Councillor Ian Courts, Jackie Homan and Carl Ennis. And I'd like to thank Andy Kerr, Martha McPherson, Jenny Holland, Richard Helsi and Fergus Worthy from the Collaborating to Net Zero Partnership. Thank you all for attending, and I look forward to being part of these conversations again in the run up to COP, so that we really are making a significant difference in the UK's leadership on local climate action. Thank you.